During the televised session of the House Oversight Committee, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. Tensions had been building for weeks, as lawmakers from both parties prepared to confront a number of issues related to ethics in public service. While the general tone of the meeting stayed within formal boundaries, there was a growing sense that someone would eventually press into more controversial territory. That someone turned out to be Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. When Crockett took the microphone, she didn't raise her voice or aim for theatrics. Her delivery was composed, deliberate, and measured. But it was clear from the start that she was building towards something significant. As she walked through her points, she repeatedly returned to the concept of integrity, the core trait she believed should define public service. She reminded the room that the public's trust isn't built solely on policies or legislation, but also on personal conduct. Leaders, she suggested, must be transparent, not only in their official duties, but also in how they navigate moments of personal failure. Then came the line that shifted the room. In a clear and steady voice, she referred to the widely documented incident involving a hush money payment, an event that had long hovered in the background of political conversations, but had rarely been spoken of directly in formal settings. She pointed out that this payment was made in an effort to conceal an extramarital affair that allegedly took place while the former president's wife had just given birth to their son. There was no venom in her tone, no mockery, no attempt to exaggerate. She wasn't looking for gasps or applause. In fact, she seemed completely unbothered by how the comment might be received. She was simply stating a fact, one that had been corroborated through court documents, sworn testimony, and public admissions. And that's precisely what made it land with such weight. By choosing to address the issue in such a plain and factual manner, Crockett did something rare in today's political climate. She made a powerful statement without making it sound like a performance. She didn't use names. She didn't need to. The story she referenced was well known, having been discussed in the press, debated in courtrooms, and examined in multiple legal proceedings. But it had rarely been framed in such human terms, within the context of trust, family, and public service. The silence in the room following her statement said more than any immediate reaction could. Some lawmakers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others stared down at their notes. For a few seconds, the usually combative chamber had nothing to say, not because they disagreed with the facts, but because hearing them expressed so plainly with no spin, no hyperbole, caught them off guard. What made her approach so effective was the way she grounded it in principle rather than politics. She didn't accuse, she didn't speculate. She highlighted a specific action and asked the implicit question. If a leader is willing to hide something that personal, and go to such lengths to cover it up, what else might they be willing to hide? More importantly, how can voters be expected to trust someone who won't be honest about their most basic responsibilities as a partner and parent? In political discourse, it's common for people to shout over each other, to rely on emotional appeals, or to drown out difficult conversations with noise. Crockett took the opposite route. She let the truth sit unadorned, and in doing so, gave it more power than any monologue or outburst could have achieved. There was no need to embellish. The truth, as she delivered it, was enough. That moment didn't go viral because of outrage or spectacle. It went viral because people recognized sincerity when they saw it. They saw a lawmaker refusing to look away from something uncomfortable, and choosing instead to confront it with quiet courage. And that courage didn't come from trying to score points. It came from believing that the truth matters, even when it's inconvenient. The moment Jasmine Crockett raised the issue of the hush money payment connected to Donald Trump, the energy in the room shifted. Up until that point, the conversation had been largely procedural, focused on committee rules, campaign ethics, and standard partisan exchanges, but when Crockett tied Trump's personal conduct to larger questions about public trust, the stakes became instantly higher. It wasn't just about what happened behind closed doors in Trump's personal life. It was about how that secrecy intersected with the machinery of political power, influence, and even national security. Trump's alleged affair with adult film actress Stormy Daniels, and the subsequent hush money payment, had been widely reported and legally examined. The payment, $130,000, was funneled through his then attorney, Michael Cohen, just weeks before the 2016 election. In later court testimony, Cohen admitted that the purpose of the payment was to prevent the story from damaging Trump's campaign. At a critical moment, that act of concealment didn't exist in isolation and involved campaign finance laws, fraudulent accounting practices, and efforts to silence a witness. Trump has always denied wrongdoing, claiming the payment was personal, but federal prosecutors saw it differently, and Cohen served time in prison partly because of that transaction. Crockett didn't rehash those legal details. Instead, she focused on the principle behind the act. What does it mean when a man running for the highest office in the land arranges to bury his story not just to protect his family's privacy, but specifically to avoid public backlash before an election? And what does it say about a leader's character when they're willing to hide that truth from voters? Asterisk, by highlighting that Trump made this payment while his wife had just given birth to their son, Crockett wasn't just trying to strike an emotional chord. She was making the point that character matters not in an abstract, moralistic sense, but in real, measurable ways. A person's private choices become public concerns when they involve deception, financial manipulation, and potential blackmail risks. The presidency isn't just a title. It's an institution built on trust. And any cracks in that foundation, whether they stem from dishonesty, self-interest, or secret payments, have the potential to weaken it for everyone. Asterisk, what Crockett exposed, without sensationalism, was the clear intersection between Trump's personal missteps and the political machinery that was deployed to hide them. That payment didn't come out of a family bank account in private. It was arranged through legal channels connected to Trump's campaign and inner circle. It triggered investigations not because of the affair itself, but because of how the cover-up was executed using influence, power, and pressure in ways that blurred the line between personal and political conduct. Asterisk, and this is where her argument became especially sharp. If someone is willing to use campaign resources, legal threats, and loyal intermediaries to hide an affair from the public, how can anyone be sure they won't use the same tactics to suppress damaging information about national security, foreign relations, or even intelligence briefings? If secrecy and image management take priority over transparency, where does the deception stop? Asterisk, Crockett's remarks didn't dwell on judgment. She wasn't trying to shame Trump or dive into tabloid territory. She was asking the public watching, to consider how much influence personal vulnerabilities can exert over public decision-making. If a person in power has something to hide, they become easier to manipulate, and if their goal is self-preservation above all else, then their decisions are no longer about what's best for the country, they're about what protects them. Asterisk, that's why her framing of the issue was so effective. It wasn't about whether Trump was a good husband. It was about whether a person with such a deeply compromised track record could be trusted to act in the nation's best interest when no one is watching. She took what many dismissed as a private matter and laid bare how that private matter spilled into the public sphere, with real consequences. Asterisk, trust in public service is built on consistency between a person's words and actions. When someone hides personal scandals behind walls of legal complexity, financial payoff, and denial, it sends a message that the truth is negotiable. For Crockett, that was the core issue. Not the scandal itself, but what it revealed about how Trump views accountability as something to evade rather than uphold. Asterisk, when Jasmine Crockett calmly referenced Donald Trump's hush money scandal during a live televised hearing, the immediate reaction from Trump himself was swift, emotional, and unmistakably defensive. Within hours, he took to his social media platform, Truth Social, and posted an angry response targeting Crockett personally. He called her a disgrace, accused her of spreading lies, and insisted the affair had been debunked. But the tone of his response betrayed something deeper than routine pushback. This wasn't just about defending himself from a political jab, it was about rage that someone had dragged very uncomfortable truth back into the public spotlight, in a setting he could not control. Asterisk, Trump's public reaction stood in sharp contrast to Crockett's measured tone, where she had simply stated a fact that a hush money payment had been made during a sensitive moment in Trump's family life. His reply was bombastic and indignant. His furious post lacked any substantive rebuttal. Instead of addressing the documented truth of the payment or the implications of it, Trump resorted to name-calling and vague denials, which only amplified the moment. What might have remained a focus moment in a congressional hearing suddenly became national news again. Asterisk, observers noticed that Trump's message lacked any of the usual deflection strategies that typically work in his favor. There was no clever nickname for Crockett, no diversion to another issue, no redirection to Hunter Biden or the deep state. It was just anger. That was telling, because if the point Crockett made had truly been baseless or irrelevant, Trump likely would have ignored it or waved it off with sarcasm. But his immediate and intense reaction indicated that the moment had struck a nerve, not just politically, but personally. Asterisk, what Crockett said wasn't new. The story of the hush money payment to Stormy Daniels had been thoroughly covered in the press, in court documents, and during Michael Cohen's testimony. Trump himself had indirectly acknowledged it. But what made Crockett's comments so impactful was that she placed it squarely in the context of leadership and accountability, and did so in an official government hearing, on live television. There was no media filter, no partisan framing, just the raw delivery of a simple, disturbing truth. Asterisk, Trump has long positioned himself as someone who can brush off controversy. In fact, part of his political identity has been his ability to weather scandal without flinching. But the resurgence of this particular issue and the way Crockett tied it directly to a moment in his personal life exposed a vulnerability he rarely lets the public see. His marriage, especially the timing of his alleged affair with Stormy Daniels during Melania's pregnancy, has always been a topic he tries to keep at arm's length. He's rarely addressed it in depth, and Melania has remained largely silent on the matter. Asterisk, that silence has allowed Trump to largely sidestep the emotional and moral implications of the scandal. But Crockett's comment forced it back into view, not with judgment or insults, but with precision. And in doing so, she hit on something Trump's team has tried to avoid for years: the human cost of his actions. It wasn't about campaign law in that moment. It wasn't about financial disclosures. It was about a decision he made that affected his wife, his family, and, by extension, the public's understanding of who he is. Asterisk, the intensity of his reaction also drew attention from political analysts and news commentators. Many noted that the former president's response seemed out of proportion to what was actually said. That overreaction, in turn, made the public pay even more attention to original point. It gave her words more weight, not less. Asterisk, in many ways. Trump's outburst confirmed what Crockett had implied, that he sees truth as a threat, not because it's false, but because it exposes. His emotional reaction didn't refute her claim. It reinforced the idea that there are facts he still doesn't want the public to confront. His attempt to discredit her only served to spotlight how damaging the truth can be when it's calmly and confidently stated in a public forum. And, in that sense, Crockett didn't just make a point, she triggered a revealing moment of political panic. Asterisk. After Jasmine Crockett delivered her pointed remarks during the televised committee hearing, social media lit up. Not because she shouted, not because she insulted, but because she laid down a quiet, factual bombshell, one that reminded the public that Donald Trump's controversies weren't confined to legal documents and news cycles. They had personal human consequences, and more importantly, they shaped how Americans view leadership, honesty, and accountability. Asterisk, in the hours that followed the hearing, clips of Crockett's.com takedown went viral across multiple platforms: X, formerly Twitter, TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram. Users weren't just reacting to the drama. They were struck by the clarity and tone. People shared the moment with captions like, "Finally, someone said it plainly," or "This is how you confront corruption without theatrics." Some posts included side-by-side videos of Trump denying any wrongdoing and Michael Cohen's past testimony under oath, which painted a very different picture. For many, it felt like the dots were being connected publicly, without media spin or political noise. Asterisk, cable news networks quickly picked up the clip, and analysts from across the spectrum began weighing in. What they found interesting wasn't just what Crockett said, it was the way it reopened a conversation that many political figures had tried to push aside. The hush money scandal had become part of the broader public understanding of Trump's history, but in many ways, it had faded from urgent relevance. Crockett changed that. She reframed it not as gossip or personal drama, but as a serious ethical issue with implications for public trust. Asterisk, young voters, in particular, took notice. On TikTok, creators began using the clip as a springboard for broader conversations about political transparency and integrity. Some recounted the original Stormy Daniels story, while others questioned how Trump's base continued to dismiss behavior that would likely destroy any other politician's career. What made Crockett's moment resonate wasn't just her words. It was her ability to pull a once sensational story out of the shadows and present it as a matter of leadership. Asterisk, for years, Trump had benefited from a media environment in which scandal fatigue worked in his favor. By the time one controversy was being digested, another was already in the headlines. That pace made it difficult for the public to truly process any single issue. But Crockett's moment slowed everything down. She isolated one event, one decision, and put it in front of millions with unflinching clarity. And the internet responded accordingly. Asterisk, hashtags like hashtag Crockett Truth and hashtag Trump Marriage started trending. Political commentators debated the ethics of discussing a leader's marriage in a public setting, but many concluded that once the scandal crossed into legal and campaign territory with hush money, falsified records, and a former fixer testifying in court, it was no longer a private matter. Crockett didn't break any new news, but she revived a crucial question: what happens when personal dishonesty intersects with public power? Asterisk, even some moderate and conservative-leaning commentators admitted the issue hadn't been resolved. While Trump's loyal supporters dismissed the moment as cheap politics, others recognized it as a reminder of how much had gone unaddressed. Crockett didn't call for punishment or make legal accusations. She asked whether a man who orchestrated such a cover-up could be trusted with the full power of the presidency again. That question landed with more people than the usual partisan divide might suggest. Asterisk, meanwhile, the Trump campaign went into damage control mode. Statements were released, spokespersons appeared on friendly networks, and surrogates tried to shift the conversation toward immigration and inflation, but the clip kept circulating, not because it was sensational, but because it was simple, and simplicity, in the age of media overload, has power. Asterisk, in the end, Crockett's approach did more than just highlight a scandal. It reignited a national conversation about what leadership looks like, and it showed that sometimes, the most effective political moments aren't the loudest ones, but those that speak to the public's quiet demand for honesty. By framing Trump's hush money payment not as a salacious affair, but as a character test, Crockett gave people a reason to stop, listen, and reconsider what they thought they already knew. In the aftermath of Jasmine Crockett's pointed remarks during the committee hearing, a deeper shift began to take place, not just in the media cycle, but in the public's perception of leadership, accountability, and the weight of personal integrity. What she delivered wasn't a takedown filled with insults or partisan rage. It was a moment of clarity that asked the American public to re-examine what it truly means to trust someone with power. Donald Trump has weathered countless controversies throughout his political career. From inflammatory rhetoric to legal investigations, he's mastered the art of brushing off scandal and reframing the narrative. But what Crockett did on live television bypassed his usual defenses. She didn't come at him with slander or dramatics. She simply told the truth. And in today's climate, that truth, when spoken calmly and confidently, carries more impact than the loudest outrage. Her comments served as a reminder that the presidency isn't just about policy positions or party loyalty. It's about character. It's about whether voters can believe that the person sitting in the highest office will tell the truth, make sacrifices for the public good, and be held accountable when they fall short. When Crockett referenced the hush money payment, made during a moment that should have been sacred for any family, she wasn't rehashing tabloid drama. She was shining a light on a leader's willingness to manipulate and conceal, not just for personal reasons, but to win an election at any cost. The reaction, both from Trump and from the broader public, revealed the power of her words. Trump's swift, angry response showed that the moment had struck a nerve. Meanwhile, the public's overwhelming engagement proved that Americans are still paying attention, still listening, still deciding who deserves their trust. What unfolded wasn't just a viral moment. It was a turning point, a reminder that the truth, even when it's uncomfortable, still matters. It reminded voters that leadership isn't just about winning or dominating the headlines. It's about being worthy of the public's faith. And that faith isn't granted easily. It must be earned through honesty, humility, and the courage to face one's own failings. Jasmine Crockett didn't change the facts. She simply refused to ignore them. And in doing so, she reminded the nation that the standards we hold for our leaders must not be lowered for convenience or political gain. In the face of noise, distraction, and endless spin, her words offered something rare in politics today. A clear and steady voice, grounded in truth. And sometimes, that's all it takes to make